Welcome to the third video of this interior weather station tutorial. In this video I'm going to show you the basics of soldering and how to attach these male headers to our sensors in Raspberry Pi. Two of my sensors already have headers, and the reason we need these is to either attach jumper wires or to attach sensors to the breadboard or to perf board, or like in our case to female headers, which we will in turn then solder to the perf board to be able to exchange the sensors. Now before we mess around with the sensors, I want us to practice first, so I'm going to move these away and use this wooden board as protection for my desktop. And now we're going to need a soldering iron and some solder. There are different types of solder. This one says SN 99.3 Cu 0.7. That means it consists 99.3% of tin, which is SN, and 0.7% of Cu, which is copper. There's also leaded solder, then you would have a PB written somewhere here. Leaded solder is easier to use, but it's also more dangerous for your health and the environment. So a lot of countries have actually prohibited it. The other differentiating factor is the thickness of the solder. The one I'll be using here is nice and thin, and it'll be easy to use for the little bits and pieces that we're going to solder. The nice thing about this thicker solder here is if I hold it close to the camera and we allow it to focus, you'll see that it has an inner core and an outer layer. And the outer layer is basically the metal, and the interior is a chemical that helps the metal become more fluid, so it flows into all the little crevices and creates a stronger, smoother bond. You'll notice that while you're soldering that something will dissipate. You'll see smoke. That'll be that chemical. If you solder for too long, then your solder connection will become sort of yellowish and hazy, and it'll become more and more difficult to create a nice solid bond. So the trick about soldering is basically to find the balance between soldering just enough and not too long. So I'd like us to practice first on a little bit of proto board here. So first of all, you can see that the tip is sort of getting a little bit brownish. So here we're going to use this wool to sort of clean it. And you can see how it becomes nice and shiny. We'll take the solder in one hand and the soldering iron in the other hand. And it's usually a good idea to distribute just a little bit of solder on it. And the way we're going to do this now is that we're going to hold the soldering iron to one of those metal plates for a little bit over a second, maybe, to heat it up. Then we're going to insert some of the solder for about a second, and then we're going to remove the solder and keep the soldering iron there for another second. Let me just zoom in onto this so that you can really get a sense of what I'm doing here. Okay, that should be fine. Okay, are you ready? Here we go. So I'm going to hold soldering iron here for a little bit. Insert some solder. There you go. Okay. I'll do it another time here. That one went right through. There you go. Okay, so I encourage you to pause the video and try this out by yourself, and I'll see you back here in a bit. Okay, what I'd like us to try next is to actually take some header and solder it to the perf board. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to take the breadboard and attach the header there so that it doesn't move anymore. And I'm going to place this here where I want it to be soldered. The problem with this is that it's at an angle here, so I need it to be like this. So I'm just going to use some other material to create the height that I need. Seems about right. Gonna hold it here for a second. There we go. And there you go. It usually cools down after just a couple seconds. Let's see how this went. Pretty good. I'll just zoom out a little bit. Yeah, and that's pretty much what a solder connection looks like. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, let me just go ahead and get all the sensors that we need. And now I will take some headers and cut the amount of headers that the amount of pins that I need. So in this case, I need 7, 3, 3, 7. Okay, so you might have noticed that one component is still missing, and that is the Raspberry Pi. Now, some of you probably got a Raspberry Pi with headers already soldered onto it. If that was the case, they were probably soldered on this way around. Now, that's fine, but in our case, remember we're going to have a perf board where we attach all the sensors like this, and I'd like to have them all on one side. So that means if your headers are soldered on this way, you'll need to later on attach the Raspberry Pi this way. I'd prefer to do it this way around, so attach them from the other side, so that the heat from the processor dissipates upward and doesn't affect the temperature sensor. So the problem with this is that we basically need a double header, kind of like this, because we've got 2 rows of headers. Now, I don't have one of those double headers, but it doesn't really matter. I can just use 2 of these. Okay, it's pretty good that that happened. What you can see here is that I used quite a lot of solder. I don't really like this connection here, so I actually want to remove that. And to do that, I'm going to use this desoldering pump. And the way that works is you go like this. Oops, that wasn't supposed to happen. Then you heat up the solder with the soldering iron, and you hold the soldering pump here. And when you press the button, suction is created that takes away the excess solder. So let me just try that out. There we go. So now I've removed a little bit too much, so I'll simply do that solder connection again and then continue with the rest. See you in a bit. So that seems to have worked. It was a little bit tricky in part, but looks fine to me. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video where I'm going to be talking about setting up the Raspberry Pi and installing the software.